You'll pay for this. I'll own you, she shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her own venom as the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. It was a satisfying sound, a clean, mechanical click that signaled the end of a long and ugly war I never wanted to fight. But let me back up. Before the police, before the federal charges, before my quiet life became a strategic battlefield, it all started with a fence. Just a simple white picket fence. If you enjoy stories about bullies getting exactly what they deserve, you'll want to stick around for this one. Make sure you're subscribed, because you won't believe how far this went. What would you do if a neighbor declared war on you over something so trivial? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm curious to see how far this story travels. It's a tale about a homeowners association president who thought she was a queen, a quiet man who just wanted to be left alone, and the ridiculously over-engineered steel fence that brought her entire corrupt kingdom crashing down. My name is Mark. I'm a structural engineer, and for 30 years, my life had been about stress loads, tensile strengths, and building things that were meant to last. My world was one of concrete, steel, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-executed blueprint. I built bridges, designed foundations for skyscrapers, and spent my days ensuring things didn't fall down. It was a good life, a stable life, built on a solid foundation with the woman I loved, Helen. When Helen passed away a year before all this began, the foundation of my own life developed a fissure so deep I thought the whole structure would collapse. The house we'd lived in for 2 decades, the one she had filled with light and laughter and the scent of baking bread, suddenly felt cavernous and cold. It was her dream home, nestled in a quiet, leafy subdivision called Lakeside Meadows. It was the kind of place with manicured lawns and an unspoken competition for the best seasonal decorations. I stayed because it was the last piece of her I had left. Every corner held a memory. The worn spot on the armchair where she read her novels, the chipped coffee mug she refused to throw away, the rose bushes she'd planted along the back fence. My life had downshifted into a quiet rhythm of work, home, and tending to those roses. I was seeking equilibrium, a new kind of stability after the earthquake of her loss. All I wanted was peace. But peace, I would soon learn, was not on the agenda in Lakeside Meadows. Not as long as Carol was in charge. Carol was the president of our homeowners association. She was a woman in her mid-50s who carried herself with the unearned authority of a minor dictator. She had perfectly coiffed blonde hair that looked like it would shatter if you touched it, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Her weapon of choice was a clipboard, which she wielded during her daily patrols of the neighborhood in her gas-guzzling, pearl-white SUV that was far too large for our narrow suburban streets. She was the self-appointed guardian of aesthetic conformity. Grass too long. You gotta notice. Holiday lights still up on January 2nd. A fine. Trash cans left out an hour past the designated time. A formal, threatening letter. She was a petty tyrant ruling a tiny, manicured fiefdom, and most people were too tired or intimidated to challenge her. They just paid the fines and muttered under their breath. I'd managed to stay off her radar for the better part of a year. I kept the lawn mowed, the hedges trimmed, and the house in immaculate condition, more as a tribute to Helen than out of any fear of Carol. The house was a monument to my wife, and I would not let it fall into disrepair. The problem started with the fence. The white picket fence at the edge of my property line bordered the street on a gentle curve of the cul-de-sac. It was the same fence we'd installed 20 years ago. Helen had loved it. She said it made the house look friendly, welcoming. It was where her prize-winning roses grew, their crimson and yellow blossoms weaving through the white pickets. The first incident was subtle. A black scuff mark on one of the pickets, right at bumper height. I noticed it while watering the roses one Tuesday evening. I figured someone had just misjudged the turn. I scrubbed it off and thought nothing more of it. A week later, another mark appeared, this time with a small crack in the wood. It was in the exact same spot. My internal alarm, the one honed by years of analyzing stress points and potential failures, began to ping softly. This wasn't random. It was a pattern. The following Tuesday, I was in my home office, which overlooked the front yard. I heard the familiar low rumble of Carol's oversized SUV as it began its slow crawl around the cul-de-sac. I watched as she approached my property. She slowed, stopped, and then I saw her reverse lights flash on. With a deliberate, almost lazy slowness, her vehicle moved backward until the massive chrome bumper made contact with my fence. There was a dull thud. She pulled forward and drove off without a glance back. I sat there, stunned. It was intentional. There was no other car on the street, no reason for her to back up. She was doing it on purpose. But why? It made no sense. It was like a bug in the code, an illogical action that served no purpose. I walked outside and inspected the damage. The cracked picket from last week was now split clean in two. I took a photo with my phone. My initial reaction wasn't anger, but a profound sense of weary disbelief. I was a man grieving his wife, trying to hold his life together, and now I had to deal with this absurdity. I decided on the direct, reasonable approach. I was an engineer, after all. We identified problems and found logical solutions. The next day, I saw her making her rounds again. I stepped outside and waved her down, adopting my most non-threatening, neighborly posture. "Carol, good morning," I said, forcing a polite smile. She rolled down her window, her sunglasses hiding her eyes but not the condescending tilt of her head. "Mark," she said, her tone suggesting I was an unpleasant surprise, like finding a weed in a prize-winning petunia bed. "Is there a problem?" "I just wanted to ask you to be a little careful around the fence," I said, keeping my voice even. "Your bumper has connected with it a few times in the last couple of weeks. It's starting to cause some damage." She took off her sunglasses, and her eyes, small and hard, narrowed at me. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured offense. "I am an excellent driver. Perhaps your fence is deteriorating. Old wood does that, you know." "It's not deteriorating," I said calmly. "It's being repeatedly hit by a vehicle. I saw you back into it yesterday." A flicker of something, anger, satisfaction, flashed in her eyes before being replaced by a mask of cold indignation. "Are you accusing me of vandalism?" "That's a very serious allegation, Mark. I am the president of this HOA. I am dedicated to maintaining this community's standards, not destroying property." It was a masterclass in deflection and gaslighting. She was turning my calm, factual observation into a personal attack on her character. "I'm not accusing you of anything malicious," I lied, though I was starting to suspect it was exactly that. "I'm just asking you to be more careful." "Well, I will continue to drive with my usual caution," she sniffed. "And I would suggest you look into repairing your fence. A damaged fence is a violation of Section 7, Article 4 of the Community Bylaws. Good day." She rolled up her window and drove away, leaving me standing on my lawn with the faint smell of her exhaust fumes and the heavy weight of impending conflict. The problem wasn't the fence anymore. The problem was Carol. Her logic was flawed, built on a foundation of pure ego. 2 days later, an official HOA violation notice was taped to my front door. It cited me for failure to maintain property in acceptable condition, and included a photograph of my broken picket fence. The notice came with a $100 fine. The irony was so thick I could have used it as a load-bearing element. She damages my property, then fines me for the damage she caused. It was a perfect, closed loop of insanity. My annoyance was quickly solidifying into a cold, hard knot of anger. This was no longer about a fence. It was about principle. Helen had loved that fence. She had loved this house. I wasn't going to let this woman, with her petty power trips, desecrate that memory. I paid the fine, just to avoid immediate escalation. But I also replaced the broken picket and took detailed, time-stamped photographs of the completed repair. I was an engineer. I knew the value of documentation. Every project, whether it was a suspension bridge or a suburban feud, started with a clear and accurate record. The following Tuesday, like clockwork, it happened again. This time, I was ready. I had my phone recording from my office window. I filmed her entire approach, the deliberate stop, the flash of the reverse lights, and the sickening crunch as her bumper didn't just crack a picket, but completely shattered 2 of them, leaving a splintered, gaping hole. She pulled away with the same smug indifference as before. I now had evidence. Video evidence. The logical next step was to present this to the HOA board. Surely, they would see reason. Surely, they would rein in their unhinged president. I sent a polite, professionally worded email to the board, attaching the video file and the photos of my previous repair. I explained the situation calmly and requested that they speak with Carol and cover the cost of the new damages. I was still operating under the assumption that the system was rational. That was my mistake. The response came not from the board, but from Carol herself, 2 days later. It was another official notice on my door. This one was for $200. The violation: failure to repair property in a timely manner, and installation of non-approved repair materials. I had used a slightly different brand of white paint. The notice also informed me that my unsubstantiated and slanderous accusations against the HOA president were being reviewed by the association's legal counsel. The threat was clear: shut up, or we will crush you. My attempt at a logical, peaceful resolution had failed. It had backfired spectacularly. I felt like I had submitted a carefully calculated blueprint only to have the client use it for kindling. The system wasn't rational, it was a weapon, and Carol was the one holding it. The harassment escalated. My trash cans, which I now brought in the second the truck had passed, were rolled out into the middle of the street overnight. I received anonymous flyers in my mailbox detailing obscure HOA rules I had supposedly broken. My newspaper was often found thrown into the rose bushes, sometimes soaked with what smelled suspiciously like dog urine. Carol would make a point of parking her SUV directly across from my house for hours at a time, just sitting there, a silent, intimidating presence. She was trying to unnerve me, to make me feel watched and unwelcome in my own home. She was laying siege to my peace of mind. I spoke to a few of my neighbors. Most of them were sympathetic but fearful. "That's just Carol," one of them, a timid man named George, told me in a hushed voice while glancing nervously over his shoulder. "It's easier to just pay the fines. Don't make waves." Another neighbor, a woman who had lived here longer than anyone, told me Carol had forced an elderly couple out of their home a few years back by fining them into oblivion over the color of their front door. They couldn't afford to repaint it, the fines piled up, a lien was placed on their house, and they were forced to sell. The story sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just petty tyranny, it was predatory. My only real ally was Dave, the man who lived next door. Dave was a retired police detective, a big, quiet man with a steady gaze that told you he'd seen it all. He spent most of his days woodworking in his garage. I showed him the video and the violation notices one afternoon. He watched the footage, his expression unreadable. He handed my phone back. "Well, son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You've got a classic bully on your hands. And the thing about bullies is, they only understand one language: overwhelming force. I don't want a war, Dave," I told him honestly. "I just want to be left alone." "Too late for that," he said, wiping sawdust from his hands. "She declared war when she backed into your wife's fence the first time. Right now, you're just a target. You need to decide if you're going to stay a target, or if you're going to become a threat." His words stuck with me. A threat. It wasn't in my nature. I was a builder, not a demolitions expert. My job was to create stability, not chaos. But Carol was destabilizing my life, chipping away at the sanctuary I had built with Helen. The turning point, the moment my frustration finally crystallized into cold, hard resolve, came a week later. My daughter, Sarah, had brought my 2 young grandchildren over for the weekend. Leo was 7, and Maya was 5. They were the light of my life, a joyful, chaotic force that filled the quiet house with laughter again. They were playing in the front yard, kicking a soccer ball, while I watched from the porch. Carol came on her usual patrol. She slowed her SUV to a crawl as she passed my house. She didn't stop, but she laid on the horn, a long, angry blast that startled the children. Maya burst into tears. Leo looked scared. Carol just smirked and drove on. That was it. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about me or a fence or HOA bylaws. She had brought my family into it. She had intentionally frightened my grandchildren. The engineer in me, the calm, logical man, receded. In his place stood a grandfather and a widower, a man whose quiet sanctuary had been invaded and whose family had been threatened. Dave was right. The time for being a target was over. I was going to become a threat. But I wouldn't use her tactics. I wouldn't use intimidation or harassment. I would use my own skills. I would use logic, precision, and the unyielding laws of physics. I would build a solution. A permanent one. That night, after the kids were asleep, I went down to my basement workshop. I pulled out a drafting table I hadn't used in years. I turned on the bright architect's lamp, taped down a fresh sheet of vellum, and began to design. This wasn't just a repair job anymore. This was a project. I called it Project Bedrock. The first phase was investigation. A good engineer never starts building without a thorough site analysis. I needed to understand the material I was working with, not just wood and steel, but the legal and financial structures that Carol had built around herself. I spent the next 2 weeks in a deep dive. I downloaded and read every page of the Lakeside Meadows HOA bylaws and covenants, a document so dense and poorly written it was a marvel of bureaucratic obfuscation. I highlighted every ambiguity, every contradiction, every clause that gave the board discretionary power. I drove to the county records office and pulled the original plat maps for the subdivision, the deeds for every house on my street, and the articles of incorporation for the HOA. I was looking for structural weaknesses, for faults in the foundation of her authority. Dave, my retired cop neighbor, proved to be an invaluable resource. He had a friend who still worked in the county clerk's office and another who was a dab hand with online background checks. Bullies like her, Dave had said, they always have skeletons. Usually financial. He was right. We discovered that the law firm the HOA used for all its legal matters, including filing liens, was owned by a man named Martin Vance. A quick search revealed that Martin Vance's mother's maiden name was Carol's maiden name. He was her cousin. That felt too convenient to be a coincidence. We also found a pattern. Over the last 5 years, 12 homes in our subdivision had been foreclosed on by the HOA for unpaid fines and dues. Every single one of them had been purchased at auction for a fraction of its market value by a single entity, a shell corporation called Meadowlands Properties, LLC. The address listed for Meadowlands Properties was a post office box in a neighboring town. It was a dead end. Or it would have been, if Carol hadn't made another mistake. Another act of petty aggression that gave me the clue I needed. She had escalated her direct harassment of me. One morning, I found a pile of mulch and grass clippings dumped on my driveway. It was the kind of petty, childish act designed to annoy and frustrate. But as I was cleaning it up, I noticed a piece of discarded mail mixed in with the debris. It was a water bill, addressed to Carol, but the service address wasn't her home in our neighborhood. It was for a property on the other side of town. On a hunch, I looked up the address in the county property database. It was owned by Meadowlands Properties, LLC. It was a rental property. The pieces clicked into place with the satisfying certainty of a locking mechanism. This wasn't just about power. It was about money. Carol was using the HOA as a vehicle for a predatory foreclosure scheme. She would target vulnerable residents, bury them in fines, use her cousin's law firm to place a lien on their property, and then swoop in through her anonymous shell company to buy the house for pennies on the dollar. She was literally stealing people's homes. My little dispute over a picket fence had uncovered a conspiracy. The scope of my project had just expanded exponentially. Project Bedrock was no longer about simple defense. It was about demolition. I was going to dismantle her entire corrupt enterprise. But first, I had to deal with the fence. It was the initial point of conflict, and it would be the stage for the trap I was about to set. My original plan was simply to build a stronger fence. Now, my plan was to build a monument to her stupidity. A piece of defensive architecture so perfectly, poetically just that she would have no choice but to destroy herself upon it. I went to the city planning office and filed for a permit to replace my fence. I didn't need one for a simple repair, but I wanted this to be completely, unimpeachably legal. I submitted a set of formal blueprints, complete with material specifications and structural calculations. The clerk looked at my plans, which were more detailed than some commercial building submissions, and raised an eyebrow. "This is a very robust fence, mister," he said. "I've had some issues with vehicular traffic," I replied dryly. He stamped the permit without another word. With the legal groundwork laid, I began construction. First, I tore down the last remnants of Helen's old picket fence. It was a sad moment. I carefully removed the climbing roses, transplanting them to a trellis on the side of the house where they would be safe. Then, the new materials arrived on a flatbed truck. Not wooden pickets and posts, but steel. For the main posts, I had sourced 4 6-foot-long, W8x31 I-beams. The kind of steel girders used in commercial construction. For the pickets, I had custom-ordered 2 dozen 4-inch diameter, 1/4-inch thick steel pipes, cut to length and sealed. I rented a power auger and dug holes 6 feet deep for each I-beam post. I set them in place with a level, ensuring they were perfectly plumb. Then I mixed and poured 2,000 pounds of high-strength, quick-set concrete, the kind rated for highway barriers. I filled the holes, encasing the bottom 6 feet of each I-beam in a massive, immovable block of solid rock. The foundation of my new fence was stronger than the foundation of my house. Once the concrete had cured, I welded the steel pipes into place between the I-beams, mimicking the look of a traditional picket fence. The spacing was the same, the height was the same. The final step was the camouflage. I applied 3 coats of high-quality, brilliant white paint. From 20 feet away, it looked almost identical to the old wooden fence. It looked friendly, welcoming. But it was a lie. It was a carefully engineered trap, a passive-aggressive masterpiece of structural engineering. The old fence was designed to define a boundary. This new fence was designed to enforce it. The whole process took a week. I worked methodically, enjoying the physical labor and the precision of the task. Dave would come over with beers in the evening, watching my progress with a growing smile. "You know, Mark," he said one night, tapping one of the steel pipes with his knuckle. It rang with a dull, solid thud. "I think you may have missed your calling in siege warfare." "I'm just a man who believes in building things to last," I replied. I also upgraded my security. I installed 2 new high-definition cameras. One was positioned to get a perfect, wide-angle shot of the entire fence line. The other was a telephoto lens aimed directly at the exact spot Carol always hit. Both recorded to a secure cloud server and a local hard drive. I would not lose this evidence. Everything was in place. The trap was set. The blueprints were complete. Now, all I had to do was wait for the client to show up for the final inspection. I didn't have to wait long. Tuesday was just around the corner. That Tuesday morning, I felt a strange sense of calm, the quiet focus that comes before a critical stress test. I sat in my office, a cup of coffee in hand, with the live feed from my security cameras displayed on my secondary monitor. It was showtime. Right on schedule, at 10:15, her pearl-white SUV turned onto my street. It crawled along, a land shark patrolling its territory. I watched her slow down as she approached my house. I could see her lean forward, squinting at the new fence. From her vantage point, it would have looked pristine, perfect, perhaps a little too uniform. She probably thought I had simply given in and installed a new vinyl fence. She drove past, and for a moment, I thought she might not do it. Maybe the newness of it, the sheer perfection of its white paint, had thrown her off her rhythm. But then, about 20 feet past my property line, her brake lights flared. I saw the reverse lights come on. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart starting to beat a little faster. This was it. The moment of impact. The practical application of all my theoretical calculations. She wasn't gentle this time. She was cocky. Emboldened by my repeated compliance, my quiet repairs, my seeming unwillingness to fight back. She hit the accelerator, and the 2-ton vehicle shot backward at a surprising speed. She was aiming for the corner post, the main I-beam, the strongest point in the entire structure. She wasn't just trying to crack a picket anymore. She was trying to take down the whole section. The sound was not the splintering crack of what I had grown used to. It was a deep, resonant, metallic concussion. A sound like a giant church bell being struck by a sledgehammer. It echoed through the quiet suburban morning, a deafening declaration that the rules of the game had changed. On my monitor, I saw the impact. The fence did not move. It did not shudder. It did not yield by so much as a millimeter. It was, for all intents and purposes, an extension of the Earth's bedrock. Carol's SUV, however, was not. The law of conservation of momentum is a cruel and impartial mistress. All that kinetic energy had to go somewhere. Her rear bumper vaporized, crumpling into a jagged metal mess. Her tailgate buckled inward, the safety glass shattering into a million tiny cubes. The impact traveled through the vehicle's frame, visibly twisting it. Both rear tires were splayed out at grotesque angles. The rear axle was clearly, catastrophically broken. Her SUV, her symbol of power and dominance, was impaled on my fence post, crippled and broken. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The test was a complete success. The structure had performed exactly as designed. I gave it a minute. I saw the driver's side door swing open, and Carol practically fell out onto the pavement. She stood there, staring at the back of her car in utter, slack-jawed disbelief. Her brain was clearly struggling to process the data. Wood brakes. Metal bends. Her car was supposed to be the hammer, and my fence the nail. The physics were all wrong. Doors started opening up and down the street. Dave was already on his porch, a huge grin spreading across his face. George, the timid neighbor, peeked out from behind his curtains. A few others gathered on their lawns, drawn by the sound of the crash. I saved the video file, backed it up, and then walked calmly outside, tablet in hand. I approached Carol as she was starting to transition from shock to rage. Her face was turning a blotchy red. "Are you okay, Carol?" I asked, my voice the picture of polite concern. "You. What did you do?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at my fence, then at me. "What is that thing? You did this on purpose." "It's my new fence," I said simply. "I had it permitted and professionally installed. It seems to be quite sturdy." "Sturdy? You've destroyed my car," she screamed, her voice rising in pitch. A small crowd of neighbors was now watching the unfolding drama with rapt attention. "Actually," I said, holding up my tablet and playing the video from the telephoto lens camera, "it appears you destroyed your car on my fence." Again. I angled the screen so the other neighbors could see. The video was crystal clear. It showed her SUV accelerating backward with undeniable intent, right up to the moment of impact. There were audible gasps from the onlookers. George's eyes went wide. Carol stared at the video, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The evidence was irrefutable. She was caught, red-handed, in front of an audience. Her carefully constructed facade of the diligent, rule-abiding community leader was collapsing in real time. Her programming rebooted, and she defaulted to her primary function, attack. That's an illegal structure. It's a weapon. You're endangering the community. I'm calling the police. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you have. You do that, I said calmly. I have the city-approved permits right here. And this video. And the videos from the last 6 weeks. I'm sure the police will be very interested to see them. She pulled out her phone and furiously jabbed at the screen, her hands shaking with rage. As she screamed at the 911 operator about my booby-trapped fence, I turned to the gathered neighbors. For those of you who are curious, I said in a loud, clear voice, this is what happens when you build to code. I tapped the I-beam post. It rang with a solid, satisfying tone. The tone of victory. The police arrived, as did a tow truck. Carol gave a hysterical, rambling statement about how I had maliciously installed a reinforced barricade to destroy her vehicle. The 2 officers listened patiently, then came over to speak with me. I calmly showed them the video on my tablet, explained the history of the harassment, and then produced the stamped, official permit from the city. One of the officers looked at the mangled SUV, then at my pristine fence, then back at me. He was trying very hard not to smile. "Well, mister," he said, handing back my tablet. "As far as I can see, a moving vehicle struck a stationary, legally permitted object on private property. This is a civil matter. Her insurance company will probably be very interested in your video." They informed Carol that they would not be filing any charges against me. Her face, already red with rage, seemed to darken to a shade of deep purple. It was a color I imagined was reserved for the deepest levels of structural failure. As the tow truck driver struggled to pull the wreckage of her SUV off my unyielding fence post, she locked eyes with me. Her expression was no longer just angry. It was venomous. It was a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I do, Carol, I replied quietly. I think I'm just starting to figure it out. The first phase of Project Bedrock was complete. The bait had been taken, the trap had sprung, and I had won the battle of the fence. But I knew, looking at the hatred in her eyes, that the war was far from over. She was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. Carol's public humiliation did not chasten her. It did the opposite. It was like applying a catalyst to a volatile chemical reaction. Her campaign of petty harassment exploded into a full-scale, scorched-earth assault on my life. She was no longer trying to annoy me into submission, she was trying to destroy me. The very next day, a certified letter arrived from her cousin's law firm. It was a notice of intent to sue me for the damages to her vehicle, claiming I had created a public nuisance and an abnormally dangerous structure. It was baseless and legally laughable, but it was designed to intimidate and drain my resources. I forwarded it to my own lawyer with a note, file this under fiction. Then came the attack on my professional life. She must have done some digging, because a formal complaint was filed with the State Engineering Licensing Board, alleging unethical conduct and moral turpitude. She claimed I was using my engineering skills to create weaponized structures, and that I was a danger to public safety. It was a direct assault on my livelihood, a calculated attempt to strip me of the very credentials that defined my career. Fortunately, the board required evidence, not just hysterical accusations, but it still meant I had to hire a lawyer and formally respond, a time-consuming and stressful process. The public smear campaign began in earnest. Flyers appeared on lampposts and community notice boards. They featured a grainy, zoomed-in photo of me from my own security camera, making me look like some kind of lurking predator. The text below was libelous garbage, accusing me of being mentally unstable, aggressive, and a danger to our children. That was the part that truly enraged me. She crossed a sacred line. She started telling other parents in the neighborhood that she'd seen me watching the kids at the school bus stop. It was a vile, poisonous lie, designed to isolate me and turn the entire community against me. The peak of her viciousness came when an agent from Child Protective Services showed up at my door. My blood ran cold. The agent explained they had received an anonymous tip claiming I was creating an unsafe environment for my visiting grandchildren. The anonymous source had described my fortified compound and my erratic and threatening behavior. I calmly invited the agent in, showed her around the house, and explained the entire situation with Carol, backing it up with the videos and police reports. The agent was professional and understanding, but the very fact that she was there, that Carol had weaponized a system designed to protect children to harass me, filled me with a cold, pure rage unlike anything I had ever felt before. The agent closed the case as unfounded, but the violation of it all, the sheer malevolence of the act, lingered in the air. She was digging her own grave deeper with every move. Each new attack was just another piece of evidence for me to document. I saved the flyers, I recorded the new legal threats, I got a copy of the closed CPS report. My file on Carol was becoming as thick as a city building code manual. But I knew it wasn't enough. I had evidence of her harassment, but I needed to prove the underlying financial conspiracy. I needed to connect Carol to Meadowlands Properties, LLC, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I needed a keystone, the final piece that would lock the entire structure of my case together and bring the whole rotten edifice crashing down. The whistleblower arrived on a rainy Thursday evening. There was a knock on my door. I was hesitant to answer, given the recent escalation, but I checked the porch camera and saw a young man I didn't recognize, probably in his late 20s, looking nervous and soaked from the rain. I opened the door. "Are you Mark?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I am," I said, cautiously. "My name is Daniel," he said, refusing to meet my eyes. "Carol is my mother." I was stunned into silence. I ushered him inside, out of the rain. He stood awkwardly in my foyer, dripping onto the welcome mat. He looked like a man carrying an immense weight. "I'm sorry," he began, finally looking at me. His eyes were full of a weary shame. "I'm so sorry for what she's doing to you. To everyone." He explained that he had been estranged from his mother for years. He couldn't stand her greed, her cruelty, her obsession with power and control. He had tried to stay away, to build his own life, but he still heard things through family. He'd heard about her feud with me, about the fence, about the car. "I saw one of those flyers she put up," he said, his voice thick with disgust. The one about you and the kids. That's a line you don't cross. I couldn't just stand by anymore. He told me he had worked for her briefly a few years ago, helping her manage some paperwork for her real estate investments. He hadn't understood the full scope of it then, but he knew enough. He knew about Meadowlands Properties. He knew it was her. She got sloppy, Daniel said. She used to have me shred everything, but after I quit, she just started stashing it in the attic of her house. Bank statements, incorporation documents, emails she printed out. I think she liked keeping trophies of her conquests. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and held it out to me. I went to her house this afternoon. I told her I wanted to reconcile. While she was making tea, I went up to the attic. I took pictures of everything with my phone. It's all on here. I took the small piece of plastic from his hand. It felt impossibly heavy. Why are you doing this? I asked him. Because it's right, he said simply. And because she's a monster. She drove my father away, she's alienated her entire family, and she's been destroying people's lives for years for a few extra dollars. Someone has to stop her. He wouldn't stay for a drink. He just wanted to give me the evidence and disappear. As he left, he turned at the door. Be careful, he said. She's unhinged. When she finds out she's losing, she'll be capable of anything. After he was gone, I plugged the flash drive into my computer. It was a treasure trove of criminality. There were the original incorporation papers for Meadowlands Properties, LLC, with Carol's signature on an early draft. There were bank statements showing direct transfers from the Shell Corporation's account to her personal account. And there was the smoking gun. A series of printed emails between Carol and her cousin, the lawyer. They openly discussed targeting specific homeowners they deemed vulnerable. They strategized about how to levy fines to maximize financial pressure. In one particularly damning email, Carol wrote, "The old man in 24B is on a fixed income. A few more fines for his overgrown shrubs and he'll be underwater. We can pick up that property for a song." It was cold, calculated, predatory evil, all laid out in black and white. This was no longer a civil matter. This was a federal case. The emails documented clear conspiracy, wire fraud, and mail fraud. The next morning, I took everything. My meticulous log of her harassment, the videos of her hitting the fence, the police reports, the CPS report, and the contents of Daniel's flash drive. I organized it all into a single, comprehensive package, complete with a table of contents and a summary memo. It was the most important project proposal of my life. I didn't go to the local police. I didn't go to a private attorney. I went bigger. I made 2 appointments, one with the State Attorney General's office, and one with the United States Postal Inspection Service. Mail fraud is their jurisdiction, and they do not take it lightly. I presented my case to a stern-faced investigator at the AG's office and then to a surprisingly intense postal inspector. Both listened without interruption as I walked them through the evidence, from the first cracked picket to the last incriminating email. When I was done, they looked at each other. The postal inspector picked up the printed email about the elderly man. "Ma'am," he said to his colleague from the AG's office, "I believe we have enough here to open a multi-agency investigation." They told me it would take time, but that they were taking it very seriously. They asked me to continue to act as if nothing had changed, and to report any further contact from Carol immediately. As I walked out of the federal building, I felt a sense of profound clarity. The final phase of Project Bedrock was now in motion, and it was out of my hands. The structure I had built was sound. The evidence was irrefutable. All that was left was for the weight of the justice system to be brought to bear upon it. And I knew, with the certainty of an engineer who trusts his own calculations, that her entire world was about to collapse. While the wheels of justice were slowly beginning to turn in the background, Carol made her final, fatal miscalculation. She decided to stage a public execution. A notice went out to all residents of Lakeside Meadows. A special, emergency HOA meeting was being called. The agenda had only one item: to vote on the levying of punitive fines and the mandatory removal of the non-compliant, hazardous structure at the property of Mark. It was her last-ditch effort to reclaim her authority. She had been publicly humiliated on the street, and she had failed to intimidate me through legal or extra-legal means. So now she was retreating to her castle, the HOA meeting, where her power was absolute. She would put me on trial in front of the entire community, rig the vote with her cronies on the board, and declare victory. It was a classic move for a tyrant, a show trial. Dave called me as soon as he got the notice. "It's a setup, Mark. She's going to pack the room and railroad you." "I know," I said calmly. "Don't worry, Dave. I'm prepared." I had already been in contact with the lead investigator from the Attorney General's office. I told him about the meeting. He was very interested. "Let it play out," he told me. "We'll be there. Just let us know when." The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It was the biggest turnout anyone had ever seen for an HOA meeting. Most of the faces in the crowd were tense and anxious. They were here for the spectacle, the final showdown between the HOA queen and the quiet engineer who had dared to defy her. Carol sat at the head table with her two board cronies, a pair of sycophants who nodded at whatever she said. She looked composed, regal even, in a severe navy blue pantsuit. But I could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as she shuffled her papers. She was a structure under immense strain, showing the first signs of critical failure. I sat in the front row, alone. I had a laptop bag with me. That was all. Carol called the meeting to order, her voice sharp and brittle. She launched into a long, self-serving monologue about her dedication to the community, about the importance of rules and standards, about the threats posed by rogue elements who sought to undermine their peaceful way of life. It was a performance for the ages. Then, she turned her attention to me. "It has come to the board's attention," she said, her voice dripping with false solemnity, "that one of our residents, Mark, has installed a structure that is not only in violation of our aesthetic codes, but which poses a clear and present danger to the safety of our residents." She presented a series of posterboard-sized, blown-up photos of my fence. "This is not a fence," she declared dramatically. "It is an industrial barricade. A weapon." She then detailed the catastrophic damage done to her vehicle, portraying herself as an innocent victim of my malicious trap. She conveniently left out the part where she was driving in reverse at high speed into my property. "Therefore," she concluded, her voice ringing with authority, "the board proposes a fine of $50,000 for the unapproved construction and the immediate, mandatory removal of the structure at the owner's expense. We will now open the floor for discussion before the vote." A heavy silence fell over the room. No one wanted to speak first. This was my cue. I stood up. "I'd like to address the board and my neighbors," I said, my voice calm and steady. Carol gave me a smug, triumphant smile. "The floor is yours, Mark. Please, try to explain yourself." I walked to the front of the room, set my laptop on a small table, and connected it to the projector that was set up for Carol's presentation. "I think a little bit of context is in order," I said, as my desktop appeared on the large screen behind her. The first thing I projected was the video. The high-definition, crystal-clear footage of her SUV deliberately and forcefully backing into my fence. The sound of the impact, that deep, metallic boom, echoed through the silent room. I let it play on a loop. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the context. This was the 7th time in 7 weeks that Mr. Carroll had intentionally struck my fence with her vehicle. The only thing that changed on this occasion was that I had replaced the fence with a stronger, legally permitted 1 inch. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Carol's face went pale. "That video is doctored. It's fake," she sputtered. "It's not," I said flatly. "And it's already been verified by the police. But this isn't really about the fence, is it? It's about a pattern of harassment and abuse of power." Then, I opened the next file. A spreadsheet. On it, I listed every fine, every threat, every act of vandalism I had documented over the past 2 months. I showed them the flyers she had circulated. I told them about the false complaint to my employer and the malicious, anonymous call to Child Protective Services. With every new piece of evidence, the crowd grew more restless, their quiet murmurs turning into expressions of shock and anger. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were all looking at Carol. "But even that," I continued, my voice cold and precise, "isn't the real story. The real story is about why. Why would an HOA president go to such lengths to harass a resident? The answer, it turns out, is money. And then I showed them the contents of the flash drive. I projected the bank statements from Meadowlands Properties, LLC. I showed them the money transfers to Carol's personal accounts. And finally, I put up the emails between her and her cousin, the lawyer. I read the most damning one aloud. The old man in 24B is on a fixed income. A few more fines for his overgrown shrubs and he'll be underwater. We can pick up that property for a song. A woman in the back of the room gasped. That was my father, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. You forced my father out of his home. The room erupted. The foundation of Carol's authority didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing at her. Her two cronies at the head table looked horrified, slowly sliding their chairs away from her as if she were radioactive. Carol was on her feet, her face a mask of pure fury and panic. Lies. All of it. He hacked my accounts. He's a criminal, she shrieked, her voice a shrill, desperate wail. It was at that precise moment that the main doors of the clubhouse swung open. Two plainclothes detectives from the Attorney General's office and a uniformed postal inspector walked into the room. The shouting died down, replaced by a stunned silence. They walked with a calm, deliberate purpose, parting the crowd as they made their way to the front of the room. They walked right past me and stopped in front of a sputtering, wide-eyed Carol. Carol, one of the detectives asked. Yes, she stammered. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and multiple counts of grand larceny. The detective pulled out a pair of handcuffs. And that's when she looked at me, her face contorted with a rage so pure it was almost sublime, and she screamed the words that I will savor for the rest of my life. You'll pay for this. I'll own you. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a project reaching its final, successful conclusion. The sound of justice. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Carol's empire crumbled like a structure built on sand. Her arrest at the public meeting became the stuff of local legend. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, and the testimony of her own son, she was convicted on multiple federal charges. The judge was not lenient. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Her cousin, the lawyer, was disbarred and faced his own set of charges. The financial ruin was absolute. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the 12 families, including the daughter of the men from 24B, who had lost their homes to her scheme. The court seized all of her assets, including those held by Meadowlands Properties, to pay restitution. She lost everything. Her house, her money, her reputation, and her freedom. Our HOA was dissolved by a court order and completely reformed. Dave, my neighbor, was elected the new president. The first official act of the new board was to formally expunge every fine Carol had ever issued and to rewrite the bylaws to be fair and transparent, with strict limits on the board's power. A sense of liberation swept through the neighborhood. People started talking to each other again. There were block parties. The oppressive climate of fear was gone, replaced by a genuine sense of community. My life returned to a quiet sort of peace, but it was a different kind of peace than the one I had before. It was a peace I had fought for. My reputation was not only restored but enhanced. I was no longer just the quiet widower, I was the guy who had stood up to the tyrant and won. I became an unlikely local hero, something that I found both amusing and a little embarrassing. I just wanted to be left alone, and I ended up leading a suburban revolution. Sometimes, I would sit on my front porch, looking at my ridiculously over-engineered fence. It stands there today, pristine and white, a silent monument. The roses I transplanted are thriving on their new trellis, but I left the fence bare. It serves its purpose as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most peaceful man, when pushed too far, can become the most resolute warrior. A reminder that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, always have a structural weakness. You just have to know where to look. My grandkids play in the yard now without a care in the world. The fence that was born of conflict has become their guardian, a symbol of the safety and peace I fought to preserve for them, and for the memory of my wife. Helen would have hated the fight, but I know she would have been proud of the outcome. She would have loved that the community was finally the warm, welcoming place she always wanted it to be. In the end, it was never really about the fence. It was about the simple, powerful principle that you cannot let bullies win. You cannot let them take your peace, your home, or your dignity. Sometimes, you have to build your own fence, not just of wood or steel, but of resolve. You have to stand your ground and show them that their foundations are weak and that you, by standing for what is right, are standing on bedrock. So that's my story. It's a testament to the fact that one person, armed with patience, documentation, and a little bit of specialized knowledge, can indeed dismantle a corrupt system. It proves that poetic justice isn't just something you read about in books. Sometimes, you get to engineer it yourself. What do you think is the most important tool when fighting back against a bully like this? Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you want to hear more stories about people getting the justice they deserve, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for listening.